Hello and welcome back to the channel. This will be video 7 in our Python tutorial series. So if you missed the first few on installing, setting up Python and PyCharm, your first couple programs and functions, getting user input, for loops, while loops, things like that, be sure to go back and check them out if those are concepts you're unfamiliar with, as that's really important for laying a strong foundation in Python. Today's video is a little bit different. It's going to be just some things you should know about Python that haven't really been discussed in detail in past videos, some tips and tricks that can help you with some syntax things you might not be familiar with, and help you code a little bit cleaner and a little more efficiently, as well as hopefully answer some of the FAQs there are around Python. So this code's a little bit different because it's not really intended to run, it's intended to teach, and it's already constructed just so that I have everything right in front of me to talk about. The first thing I want to talk about is importing modules into your code. So you see right here, the first rung I have after my title is import math. Now this is the import statement is how you bring functionality that's not just in the core functionality of Python, but it's in these additional packages. So I have two different modules that I'm bringing into this function. I'm bringing in math, and I'm doing it this way, where I just import the entire package, and then once I need to use it, I do math dot the piece that I need, and this is how you would use the square root function inside the math package. But then the other way to do imports is you do from the module that you're importing, and then you actually say what it is that you want to use. So from random import rand int, which is how you use the random integer function, where you give it a range of integers and it returns you a random one inside of there. So these are the two different ways you can import modules in a Python function. They're both valid. It's just whether or not you want to call the actual module further down in your program or not. Both equally valid. Next thing, and this is very quick, I just want to be clear, this is a typical Python comment. This is the pound sign followed by your text, grayed out. This is how a Python comment goes. You've probably seen it in my videos or other people's videos prior, but if it was never explained to you, this is how you also could make an entire rung of code irrelevant. So if you're getting errors and you need to see the code around it running, but you think that that rung is giving you trouble, you can actually do what's called commenting it out or bypassing it with a pound sign, hash key, whatever you call this identifier. But yeah, so that's a comment. That was just a brief thing I wanted to clarify on before going forward. The next is the indentation schematic inside Python. I know when I've created for or while loops or functions in the past, I've just done the indenting and kind of said, trust me. But when you do a for loop or you do a while loop, it needs to be one indentation inside that for loop and that while loop. So what you need to know is, even when you create a loop inside of a loop and a loop inside of a loop inside of a function, it doesn't matter how many layers deep you go. The way Python knows that code is inside of something else is nesting code related to that operation inside by one tab. So you can use spaces if you get the exact right number of spaces, but it's just better to do a tab. Python needs to see it at a certain indentation level and will actually throw an error if it sees the wrong indentation level. So that's true for loops, while loops, and functions. You have to put the related code one tab inside, and then if you put a loop inside of the loop, you have to go one tab further in. Then just a couple data types that I haven't talked about prior because they don't really come up that often unless you're creating a program for something very specific, in which case you would probably be looking up these data types anyways. Python has what's called a tuple, T-U-P-L-E, and it's just it's two values separated by a comma. This is obviously really common for coordinates. This is probably the most common one. But any scenario where you would have two affiliated numbers, it's called a tuple. They come up occasionally in Python, and the important thing to know about them is you cannot modify inside of those. You can't take one piece of a tuple out and do operations with it and stuff it back in. They're inalienable. They cannot be overwritten or modified, and that's just a Python rule about tuples, and that's how it is. I mean, you'll see them. You'll start seeing some applications for them, especially as you do practice problems or create your first few projects, but not something that comes up a ton. And for now, if you just kind of know it exists, know what it is, and know really coordinates are going to be your most frequent time you would see these, you really know enough to get started. So the next is arrays, and an array is definitely something you might use in a scenario where you would, say, have a list and then you have multiple entries of those lists. So you can see here I've created an array by putting a list inside of another list and separating the lists by commas. So what we've actually done is we've said, well, we've got this row of 3 values, and then the middle row, and then the bottom row. And there's a few different ways that you can call arrays. Obviously, you can make this any size you want. But the way you call arrays is you put their indices in square brackets. And so this here is just calling all of row 2. But here, I'm actually saying row 1, column 2. And so you'll see when I print those two things out, actually, this is good. You can see all 4 of the things I have printing. So here you see the math dot square root of 25. We got 5, obviously. We got a random integer from 1 to 10, and we got 6. And then we got, the arrays, like most codes, start counting from 0. So this is actually row 0 as the code sees it by indices. So when we print all of row 2, we're actually saying 0, 1, 2. So we get all of row 2, which is 3, 3, 3. But then here we're saying row 1, so 0, 1, and then value 2, which actually, to clarify, we should probably make that something different so you can see we're getting this value when we do 1 and then 2. So you can either do just a row, or you can do row, then column, and reference a specific element inside an array. So those are really just a few things that I felt like grouping together. They're not really affiliated with one another, but they're important to know, especially as you create elaborate programs, and if you're going to become really proficient with Python and use it in any sort of advanced method. You need to know these things, even though they might not come up every day. Some of them definitely will, and depending on your application, you never know which one of these pieces of information you're going to need. So hopefully you found some of that informative. Obviously, there's no way I can catch every scenario and every piece of info you might need, but if you do have a specific question, feel free to leave it in the comments, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. If you found this information informative and you'd like to give it a like and subscribe to the channel, I appreciate that. And as always, thanks for checking it out, and see you next time. Thanks. Bye.